You were told marriage is the ultimate form of love, a sacred bond, the final destination of every successful relationship. You imagined a partner who would grow with you, support you, walk beside you. But what if the dream is a lie? What if marriage, as it's sold to you, is one of the most subtle and accepted forms of exploitation in modern life? You see the smiles in the wedding photos, the perfect Instagram couples, the fairy tale narratives, but you don't see the invisible contracts, the slow erosion of self, the quiet sacrifices that never end, and the identities that disappear behind closed doors. Have you ever sat in silence, wondering why you're so exhausted in a relationship that's supposed to make you feel whole? Have you ever felt like you were slowly giving more and more while receiving less and less? Like your time, your energy, your dreams are slowly being traded in exchange for keeping the peace? That's not love. That's psychological debt disguised as duty. This video is not anti-love. It's not about blaming your partner. It's about pulling back the curtain and exposing the machinery. It's about understanding how ancient instincts, outdated societal roles, and modern legal systems quietly turn something as beautiful as connection into a life sentence of emotional labor, economic drain, and silent surrender. From Schopenhauer's brutal truth to Carl Jung's warnings about identity loss, from evolution's mating instincts to the cold reality of family court, we're going to expose what 95% of people never see until it's too late. Because if you've ever felt like you're becoming someone you're not, sacrificing your peace for an idea of what you're supposed to be, you need to hear this. This is the truth they never wanted you to ask, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. From the time we are children, the narrative is planted deep in our minds. Marriage is the happy ending. It's the reward at the end of your personal development arc. Fairy tales end with a wedding, not a divorce. Society treats single people as incomplete, as if your life hasn't truly begun until someone picks you. But the question that no one asks is, picks you for what? For love or for service? Modern marriage is marketed as an equal partnership, but many who enter it find themselves slowly being reshaped. Over time, your role hardens: the provider, the fixer, the nurturer, the emotional sponge. One person often becomes the emotional regulator for the household. The other becomes the default problem solver. Slowly, your individuality fades under the weight of shared responsibility. And worst of all, this transformation is not seen as loss, it's seen as maturity. They'll say, "You've grown up. You've learned to sacrifice. You've put someone else first." But here's the dark twist. They celebrate your sacrifice because it serves the system. Let's go deeper. Number 1, the psychological trap of duty disguised as love. Schopenhauer once said, "Marriage is the destiny imposed on us by society." That word, imposed, carries a weight few truly comprehend. Marriage, for many, is not a conscious, aligned decision, but a reaction to social pressure. The weight of expectation begins early. From relatives who subtly suggest you're running out of time, to peers whose lives seem to follow a timeline you're expected to match. Marriage becomes less a choice and more a rite of passage you're forced to complete. You're not asked what kind of life you want. You're asked when you'll finally settle down. And so you comply. You step into the idea of love. But what you're really stepping into is a system that rewards conformity and punishes hesitation. At first, you believe you're entering a bond built on passion, connection, and mutual growth. But slowly, something shifts. The love that once felt spontaneous begins to demand proof. Not just in words, but in your sacrifices, in your daily choices, In the gradual way you begin to shape yourself around the needs of someone else, not because you want to, but because you believe you're supposed to. The danger here is not just the loss of spontaneity, it's the redefinition of love into something that must constantly be earned. You're no longer allowed to simply be. You must perform, provide, manage, support, and adjust, just to keep the illusion alive. You start to notice that expressions of love are now weighed against obligations. Time spent, money given, compromises made. You're praised not for being yourself, but for how much of yourself you're willing to sacrifice. And here lies the trap. The more you give, the more is expected. It becomes an endless cycle of proving your worth through endurance, through responsibility, through silence. Eventually, the question is no longer, what do I feel? But what am I required to do to maintain this relationship? You begin to anticipate needs before they're spoken. You suppress your own desires to avoid disruption. Your internal compass becomes irrelevant. The relationship becomes the map. You perform love the way society taught you, with consistency, with duty, with self-forgetting. But the cost of this performance is high. You lose authenticity. You lose autonomy. And over time, you lose the subtle thread that once connected your actions to genuine desire. In its place is a scripted role you never consciously auditioned for, but now play every day. The most tragic part, this shift is rarely questioned, because the world applauds you for it. They say you're mature, responsible, loyal. But beneath that applause, something quieter grows. A sense of emptiness, of identity, fading into routine. And one day you might look at yourself and realize you've mastered the art of showing up for someone else, but forgotten how to show up for yourself. Number 2, economic exploitation and the unpaid labor nobody talks about. When people talk about marriage, they focus on the big day, the dress, the venue, the rings. But almost no one talks about the economic machinery that kicks in the moment real life begins. Beneath the smiles and promises lies an invisible economy that quietly shapes the entire relationship. This isn't about who pays for dinner or splits the bills. It's about the unspoken division of labor that grows deeper with time. Emotional labor becomes the currency of peace. Financial labor becomes the proof of commitment, and both often go unnoticed, unappreciated, and unpaid. The emotional laborer becomes the household's invisible therapist, managing moods, smoothing conflicts, remembering dates, maintaining harmony. They carry the weight of mental lists no one else sees. The financial laborer becomes the foundation of survival, clocking in longer hours, chasing stability, suppressing stress to maintain the illusion of strength. And what happens when one person tries to speak about the imbalance? They're called dramatic, ungrateful, or selfish, because acknowledging the burden means acknowledging the system is flawed. In many marriages, men are quietly molded into silent providers. Their emotions are irrelevant, their exhaustion dismissed, and their worth measured in income. They don't rest without guilt because they've been taught that resting is weakness. Their identity becomes synonymous with sacrifice, and their dreams are quietly shelved in favor of keeping things afloat. On the other side, women are expected to do everything except call it work. Managing the kids, maintaining the home, mediating emotions. None of it is officially compensated, yet all of it is crucial. Even in homes where both partners work full-time, the emotional and domestic workload rarely splits evenly. The progressive language might be there, but the traditional roles remain, reinforced by subconscious beliefs passed down through generations. And when the relationship starts to fracture, the illusion of fairness shatters entirely. It's no longer about who loved more. It's about who owes what. Courts step in not to restore balance, but to assign financial responsibility. You're not treated as two people with history. You're treated as two entities bound by legal obligations. Property, custody, income. Everything is reduced to numbers and percentages. You realize this wasn't love's sanctuary. It was an economic contract disguised as romance. And worst of all, you probably never had a clear conversation about it. You never agreed to this structure explicitly, but you live inside it every day. The labor you give isn't seen as a gift. It's expected. The more you give, the less it's acknowledged. Until one day you feel used, drained and invisible, and wonder how something so sacred could feel so transactional. Number 3, the loss of identity, Carl Jung's warning. Carl Jung believed that love, while powerful, carries the dangerous potential to swallow the self when one seeks union without awareness. He warned that in our desire to merge with another, we often project parts of ourselves onto the relationship and suppress the rest into what he called the shadow, the hidden, rejected, or sacrificed elements of our identity. In marriage, this suppression doesn't just happen, it becomes a silent expectation. Slowly, the self begins to recede, not in one grand moment, but through 1,000 quiet compromises. You stop doing things you once loved, not because you no longer care, but because they no longer fit into the version of you that your role demands. You become more cautious with your words, more strategic with your silence, more calculated with your time. The shift is gradual and subtle. One day you stop writing, then you stop seeing friends. Eventually you even stop speaking your mind, because peace matters more than truth, and agreement feels safer than authenticity. You don't realize it's happening at first, because it's praised. They say you're becoming a better partner, a more mature person, someone who knows how to put others first. But beneath the applause, a quiet erosion begins. You become hyper-aware of their needs and numb to your own. You adjust your opinions, tone down your desires, and wear a version of yourself that feels more acceptable, more digestible, more lovable. It's not that you've forgotten who you were, it's that there's no space left to be that person. Identity loss in marriage doesn't always look like breakdowns or fights. Sometimes it looks like routines that never end, roles that never shift, and quiet evenings where you feel more like a function than a human being. You become a caregiver, a provider, a peacekeeper, but not a whole person. When you do try to express yourself, to ask for something real, the response isn't curiosity, it's criticism. You're too demanding, too distant, too different. You're reminded of your responsibilities, your vows, the weight of everything at stake. Suddenly, self-expression becomes a threat to the relationship, and so you fold again, telling yourself it's not worth the tension. But each time you do, another piece of you disappears into the background. Until one day, you're not sure whether you're staying because you're in love, or because there's nothing left of you to return to. You've become what they needed, what the relationship expected, what the world applauds. But you've stopped being what you truly are. And the saddest part is, no one notices, because the mask you wear is so convincing, even you start to believe it's your face. Number 4, evolutionary biology and the illusion of romantic permanence. From an evolutionary perspective, human beings were never wired for lifelong monogamy in the way modern society expects. In the ancestral world, pair bonding had a clear biological purpose: to raise children who were too vulnerable to survive alone, to create social alliances, to ensure the transmission of genes. Monogamy was never about romance or spiritual connection. It was a survival mechanism. But as survival became less dependent on these bonds and societies evolved, the instinct to form temporary pair bonds didn't just vanish, it lingered. What makes this dangerous in the modern world is that those same instincts are now forced into a rigid legal and emotional structure. Marriage. The very nature of human desire clashes with the permanence we try to impose on it. We are wired for novelty, for exploration, for variety. At the same time, we seek emotional safety, attachment, and the comfort of routine. These contradictory drives, freedom and stability, exist simultaneously within us, creating an internal war that no one talks about. When you lock those opposing instincts into a permanent contract that promises forever, the tension doesn't go away, it intensifies. You begin to feel guilt for your natural impulses. You're told that if you love your partner, you shouldn't want anyone else. But evolution doesn't care about moral rules. It cares about what kept our ancestors alive. And so, you suppress those desires thinking something is wrong with you, when in reality, you're experiencing something deeply human. The result is a quiet, creeping resentment. You look at your partner not just as someone you love, but as someone who is unconsciously tasked with fulfilling every role in your life. They must be your best friend, your lover, your emotional anchor, your intellectual equal, your co-parent, your co-planner, your financial partner, and your therapist. No human being was designed to be everything to one person. The system that demands this is broken. But instead of questioning the structure, society turns the failure inward. If your relationship begins to struggle under this pressure, the world tells you to work harder, love deeper, sacrifice more. You're taught that ending the marriage is failure, instead of recognizing that expecting permanence from a dynamic, emotional, evolving connection is what set you up to fail. Relationships falter not because love disappears, but because the design is unsustainable. We built a system that contradicts human nature, then punished people for not thriving inside it. Marriage as it exists today is not a celebration of love. It's often the attempted imprisonment of it. It traps passion in routine, curiosity in loyalty, freedom in obligation. And the tragedy is that most people blame themselves or their partner when the reality is much darker. The blueprint we were given is broken. It asks us to defy our biology, ignore our emotional needs, and live out a fantasy of permanence that was never part of our nature to begin with. Number 5. The role of guilt, shame, and cultural manipulation. Marriage isn't just a social norm. It's a psychological control system wrapped in the illusion of tradition. From the moment you're old enough to understand relationships, you're fed a script: grow up, fall in love, get married, and settle down. But behind the romantic packaging lies a darker motive: conformity. Society doesn't merely promote marriage, it enforces it through emotional blackmail. If you deviate from the path, you're made to feel like something's wrong with you. Stay single too long, and people assume you're broken, selfish, or unstable. Choose not to have children, and you're seen as cold or incomplete. Walk away from a toxic marriage, and you're branded a quitter. The system doesn't tolerate autonomy, it fears it. Because the moment you realize you don't need the institution to be fulfilled, the system loses its grip. That's where guilt and shame come in. These are not just feelings, they're tools. Tools used by religions to keep you obedient, by media to keep you dreaming of fairy tales, and by families to maintain legacy and image. They're subtle, quiet, and devastatingly effective. You don't even realize you're being controlled because the chains are invisible. They come in the form of concern. Don't you want someone to take care of you? Or veiled insults. You're too picky. These aren't questions, they're corrections, nudges back into the mold. Culture trains you to see marriage as your personal validation. If someone wants to marry you, it means you're worthy. If they don't, you must be lacking. So people stay in marriages that are dead inside, in homes where they feel like strangers, because leaving would mean shame, and society has taught them that shame is worse than misery. It's not just about love, it's about reputation. People are more afraid of being judged than they are of being unhappy, more afraid of loneliness than they are of self-abandonment. And that fear is exactly what keeps the machine running. The illusion is so deeply woven into cultural fabric that questioning it feels like heresy. But what if choosing not to marry isn't rebellion? What if it's wisdom? What if staying single or walking away or redefining relationships is not failure, but freedom? Most people won't ask those questions, because doing so requires dismantling decades of conditioning. But once you stop needing marriage to prove your worth, you begin to reclaim the one thing society tried to take: your sovereignty. Number 6. The awakening, when you finally see through the illusion. There's a quiet, private moment that changes everything. Not always dramatic or loud, but deeply unsettling. It might happen in the stillness after an argument, or in the cold distance of a dinner where no words are exchanged. It might hit you while folding laundry, scrolling your phone, or lying awake beside someone who no longer feels like home. It's not always about anger or betrayal, it's about disconnection. A sudden, undeniable feeling that something fundamental is off, not just with the relationship, but with the entire framework you've been living within. It's the first crack in the illusion. The realization that what you believed would bring you peace has only brought performance. That what was supposed to feel like belonging has instead made you invisible. And the hardest part isn't that it's happening, it's that you never questioned it before. You begin to reflect not just on your partner, but on the roles you've played to keep things functioning. You think about the times you smiled when you didn't want to, agreed when you didn't mean it, sacrificed when your soul was already tired. And for the first time you wonder why you kept pretending, why you accepted half connection as enough, why you believed that giving yourself away in pieces was a necessary part of love. This moment, this awakening, isn't about rage or blame. It's about clarity. It's about seeing through the fog of societal programming, romantic mythology, and internalized guilt. It's about realizing that you've been performing a life that never truly belonged to you. And that truth shakes everything, because now the choice is no longer between staying or leaving. It's between continuing to vanish or starting to exist again. You start asking the questions you were never supposed to ask. Who am I outside of this role? What do I actually want? What would I choose if I weren't afraid? And those questions are powerful, not because they provide instant answers, but because they give you back your voice. They disrupt the narrative. They awaken a part of you that remembers who you were before you were molded into a partner, a caretaker, a provider, or a peacekeeper. You don't have to leave your relationship to reclaim yourself. You just have to stop leaving yourself behind. Rebirth isn't always a new beginning. It's often a return to truth, to boundaries, to joy, to silence that nourishes instead of silences you. When you awaken, you begin to understand that love without self-respect isn't love. It's captivity. And freedom doesn't always come with celebration. Sometimes it comes with mourning the years you spent asleep. But after that, mourning comes something rare, something sacred, the ability to live wide awake, the hidden power of choosing yourself. They call it selfish, they call it immature, but choosing yourself is the most radical thing you can do in a world that profits off your self-abandonment. It's not about destroying marriage. It's about exposing how it's been used. It's about reimagining relationships that don't require you to shrink, suffer, or surrender. Love is not sacrifice. It's freedom. It's not performance. It's presence. And the moment you stop chasing validation from the system starts losing its power over you. What you must do now: you don't have to hate marriage, but you must understand it. Question it. Examine your role within it. Are you living your truth, or are you playing a role you never agreed to? Are you giving from fullness, or are you running on empty? Stop confusing guilt with love. Stop calling sacrifice growth. Start reclaiming the version of you that existed before they told you what you were supposed to be. You don't owe anyone your silence, your sanity, or your soul. You came here for the truth. And now that you have it, you have a choice. You can go back to sleep, or you can rise, not with bitterness, but with awareness. Love without losing yourself. Connect without being consumed. Question without shame. And above all, remember, you were not born to serve a system. You were born to be free. Drop this affirmation in the comments. I choose truth over tradition. I choose self-respect over silent sacrifice.